If I can have your attention, please. Our second session for today is about to start. It's a panel on commons, communism, and mutual aid. Let me introduce you James Simmons, who is a doctoral candidate doctoral student in Anthropology and Social Change. He will be the moderator of the panel. Claudia is here, another student, another PhD student in our program, and she will be collecting your questions for the last discussion of tonight, which begins at 7 p.m. Again, welcome, and James.
All right, so welcome to the second annual Anthropology and Social Change Conference. Very excited to introduce this second panel of the afternoon on communism and mutual aid. As Andre said, my name is James Simmons. I'm a doctoral student in the Anthropology and Social Change Department. And my particular focus is on autonomous communities of struggle, so I'm very, very excited about this. And our first speaker will be John Clark. John Clark is an eco-communitarian anarchist theorist and activist. He lives and works in New Orleans, where his family has been for 12 generations. He is the author or editor of a dozen books, most recently, The Impossible Community, Realizing Communitarian Anarchism, put out by Bloomsbury Books. He is co-moderator of research on anarchism, an international multilingual discussion list and research archives, writes a column, Imagined Ecologies, for the journal Capitalism, Nature, Socialism, and edits cyber journal Psychic Swamp, the Surregional Review. He teaches at Loyola University, where he is Curtin Distinguished Professor of Humane Letters and the Professions, Professor of Philosophy, and a member of the Environmental Studies faculty. His work can be found on johnpclark.info, maxcafford.info, and loino.academia.edu/John Clark.
It's kind of embarrassing. Does this work?
That's the recording mic, sorry about that.
Shut that door. I think we have it. In a certain sense, I have to talk about two things. One is the work of Élisée Reclus, which I think I was originally really invited to come here to talk about. To talk about him at all is kind of an overwhelming task. I spent years working on his thought, translating his works, but I think there's a huge amount to learn from him. I hope I can say a few words that are worthy of his past project. And then the other topic is the commons, the common. Maybe one thing we should do is reflect on the nature of the common and the commons. At the beginning of what we sometimes call Western thought, there was a philosopher named Heraclitus. Actually, he was from Southeast Asia, off the coast of what we sometimes call Asia Minor. Get a little bit into geography. And he talked about the fact that there is a common reason. There is he called it a logos. There is something in common in nature, in reality, within us. But already 2.5 millennia ago, Heraclitus was lamenting the fact that we were losing the common, that we were developing an individual reason which we put in the place of our common rationality, our common reason, our common sense, and that this was a disaster. In a certain sense, the disaster of civilization was already occurring 2,500 years ago. Part of that disaster was the emergence of the ego. And I think one question we have to ask is, what are the barriers to the common and the commons? One of the reasons why I love the work of Élisée Reclus is because he was, in a sense, the first person, certainly one of the first people, I think really the first person, to try to write the Earth story. In the book that we put out recently, a new edition of the book, Anarchy, Geography, Modernity, on Élisée Reclus. The first section of my commentary on Reclus is called The Earth Story, the Human Story. So one question I'd like to pose is, what is our relationship to that story? In a certain sense, our being is our relationship to that story. You know, we are beings of the earth. We share a common humanity. This is what I think Heraclitus was getting at. Reclus tells that story in great detail. He wrote a work in the late 19th century called The New Universal Geography, which was about a 17,000 page comprehensive geography of the earth and its inhabitants. He followed that with another 3,500 page work called L'Homme et la Terre, which is, in the jargon of the day, man and the earth, humanity and the earth. And in that work, he tried to tell the story of our planet, our common planet, the earth that has given birth to us and to all the beings on our planet. And the story of the flourishing and the development and the emergence of life on this planet, and the way in which human beings fit into that story. For Reclus, this story, once human society had developed to any degree of complexity, was the story of the struggle between flourishing, self-realization of our species and of all beings on Earth. The struggle between that flourishing and domination, and all the forms of domination that stand in the way of that flourishing. I think this fits very much into our question of the common and the commons. The issue is, to what extent do we experience that common history? To what extent is our life pervaded by an awareness of how we fit into that history? Particularly today, with the crisis of the earth and the crisis of humanity, it's essential for even our very survival that we become planetary beings. It's only in the late 20th century that people began to talk about globalization, that globalization became a common term in everyday conversation, in the consciousness of the public. But 150 years ago, Reclus was developing a concept of the planetization of humanity. He said as far back as 1900 that we have to overcome what we now call Eurocentrism because the center of civilization is everywhere. This is what the common is about. I want to pose another question, and I think this recent book was mentioned, The Impossible Community. I really have to talk about two things at the same time. One is the reality of the common and the commons, and the other is, how can we possibly transform our consciousness of that reality into any kind of effective action? I think we live in an era of hopelessness. Sometimes we could call it an era of denial. One of my favorite concepts, some of you may be familiar with it, the philosopher Slavoj Žižek talks about it all the time, fetishistic disavowal. It comes from Lacanian psychoanalysis. Are there some fetishistic disavowal fans here? Well, I love it. In Lacan, there's this concept that, it's a very common French expression, je sais bien, mais quand même. I know very well, but nevertheless. I know very well, X, that this fetish is just a piece of cloth, for instance. But that doesn't change my behavior in relation to it. I may know that global climate change is a reality, but that doesn't necessarily change my behavior significantly. The only thing I actually have over the years told to all of my classes is the fact that we have to remember that we're in the 6th grade mass extinction of life on Earth. I would say, did anybody tell you? I find that usually people who've gone through 12 years of primary and secondary education, a few years of college, and no one in any class has bothered to tell them, no teacher, that we happen to be in the 60s.